This is Bone Chillers to disturb your dreams. Dare to join us? Click subscribe, ring the bell. But remember, we cannot guarantee your safety from the nightmares that await. Prepare to be thrilled, chilled, and filled with a sense of dread you'll find nowhere else. Welcome to the darkness. We've been waiting.
Mr. Phantom told me to. In the quiet town of Riverview, lived a mild-mannered family, the Kents, consisting of single mother Grace, her 9-year-old daughter Emily, and their dachshund, Rusty. Their quaint home was surrounded by lush grass and a beautiful, well-maintained backyard. One sunny afternoon, Grace noticed Emily playing in the yard, her dress stained with grass and mud, her hands busily digging tiny holes. She saw Emily place her dolls into the holes, then carefully shovel the earth back in. Curious, Grace approached. "Honey, what are you doing?" Emily looked up at her mother with eyes as clear as the summer sky. "Mr. Phantom told me to bury my dolls tonight," she said simply. Grace laughed, assuming it was an imaginary friend Emily was referring to. "Oh, and why is that?" Emily didn't smile back. Instead, she replied in a matter-of-fact tone, "Tomorrow night, I am going to bury Rusty. And then, you, Mother." The words hung in the air, chilling Grace to the core. She chalked it up to Emily's odd sense of humor, shaking off the unease. She, however, warned Emily against burying Rusty and dismissed the strange conversation. The next day, however, Grace found Rusty motionless, sprawled on the kitchen floor. The sight struck her with a painful jolt, and she scrambled to the veterinarian, who couldn't identify the cause of Rusty's sudden demise. Grace returned home, heartbroken, to find Emily already digging a larger hole in the yard. Grace knelt beside her, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, Rusty is." "I know, Mom," Emily cut her off. "Mr. Phantom told me." Suddenly, the eerie conversation from the day before didn't seem so innocent. Her heart pounded, but she pushed the dread aside and buried Rusty in the backyard. She decided to seek help from a psychiatrist the next day, worried about Emily's mental state. The psychiatrist assured her that children often create imaginary friends to cope with loneliness, or in this case, possibly preemptive grief. He suggested some activities to keep Emily engaged and asked Grace to monitor her behavior. Returning home, Grace found Emily digging yet again. It was a bigger hole this time, and fear clenched Grace's heart. She gently called out to Emily, who turned around with the same matter-of-fact look. "Mr. Phantom says it's time, Mom," she said, sending an icy shiver down Grace's spine. Desperate, Grace called the local priest, Father Sullivan, and relayed her fears. He promised to visit the next morning. That night, Grace couldn't sleep, her heart pounded, her mind filled with morbid thoughts. With dawn, came Father Sullivan. Grace explained everything about Mr. Phantom and Emily's cryptic words. The priest, with a solemn face, asked to speak to Emily. Emily greeted Father Sullivan politely, her hands muddy from the fresh digging. She invited him to sit next to the freshly dug hole. "Mr. Phantom would like to meet you," she said, pointing to the empty space beside her. For a moment, a chill ran down Father Sullivan's spine, but he composed himself. He talked to Emily, blessed the house, and after a lengthy discussion with Grace, suggested it might be an entity influencing Emily's behavior. He advised her to monitor Emily and to keep him updated. Days turned into weeks, and Emily did not mention Mr. Phantom again. There were no more holes dug, and life began to regain its normal rhythm. Grace was still mourning Rusty's death, but Emily's changed behavior gave her hope. One evening, as Grace prepared dinner, she looked out of the kitchen window. Emily was playing in the yard, her hands busy in the mud, next to a freshly dug hole. Panic welled up within Grace, and she rushed outside. She reached Emily, her breath hitched as she saw what lay next to the hole, her own photo in a beautiful frame. Emily looked up, her hands muddy, and said, "It's time, Mom. Mr. Phantom is here." In the quiet town of Riverview, Grace Kent was never seen again after that day. The townsfolk whisper about the mother and daughter who once lived there. They talk about the mysterious Mr. Phantom, the buried dolls, the dog, and finally, the disappearance of Grace. The once lush and well-maintained backyard now only holds an empty house, a yard full of unexplained holes, and a secret that remains buried. The Black Pool. Nina had been experiencing bouts of insomnia for a week, but last night was different. She had woken up, trembling and cold. Outside her dorm room, the silent halls echoed with the synchronized sound of footsteps. She peered out and saw the entire dormitory population sleepwalking, their movements bizarrely synchronized, like zombies in a horror movie. An eerie chill ran down her spine as she noticed they were all heading in the same direction. Trying to understand what was going on, she decided to follow them, carefully mimicking their shuffling movements to blend in. Nina followed the somnambulant parade through the deserted campus grounds, moonlight casting long, sinister shadows across their path. Oddly, she felt no resistance from her fellow students. They seemed oblivious to her presence. The journey led to a secret entrance beneath the university's old library, a place shrouded in rumors of ghostly sightings. It was a hidden, heavy door, etched with symbols Nina could not recognize. She gulped, following the entranced students as they filed down a long, winding stone staircase, into the belly of the earth. They emerged into a cavernous underground chamber lit by dim phosphorescent fungi, casting an otherworldly blue glow on everything. At the center was a large, black pool, looking more like a portal into the abyss than a simple body of water. One by one, the sleepwalkers started to approach the pool's edge and then, with a calm that was chilling to witness, they jumped in. The dark water accepted each person without a splash, no ripple breaking its inky surface. They vanished as if swallowed by the void. Gripped with terror, Nina watched in horror as her peers disappeared into the darkness. Her heart pounded like a wild drum, but she knew she had to keep up the act. Slowly, she approached the edge of the pool. When it was her turn, she stood at the precipice, her mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. But then she noticed something, a subtle, soft glow deep within the pool. The light was faint but distinctly different from the eerie blue of the chamber. It beckoned her. Taking a deep breath, Nina closed her eyes and let herself fall into the pool. She expected cold, murky water, but instead, she felt a strange, tingling sensation. Her descent seemed to take an eternity. When she finally opened her eyes, she found herself floating in a strange, void-like space. The comforting glow she'd seen earlier surrounded her, and beneath it, a huge, translucent orb suspended in the emptiness. Inside the orb, Nina could see her fellow students. They were huddled together, their faces pale and lifeless, their eyes blank. A feeling of intense despair washed over her as she realized the terrible truth. They were not sleepwalking but being controlled, their consciousness held captive. Suddenly, Nina's gaze was drawn to a shadowy figure floating above the orb, wrapped in a cloak of swirling darkness. Its glowing red eyes locked onto hers, and a voice, like a whisper in the wind, filled her mind. "Welcome, Nina. I didn't expect you to join us voluntarily." It was the voice from her nightmares, the same chilling voice that had been tormenting her for a week, keeping her awake. The thing, whatever it was, had lured her here. You can't have me," Nina shouted, her voice echoing through the void. With a sudden burst of energy, she swam upward, away from the orb, towards the distant light of the pool's surface. She could hear the entity's screams of anger behind her, but she didn't dare look back. She swam harder, fueled by desperation and fear. Just when her strength was about to give out, her hand broke the surface of the water. Nina gasped for breath, pulling herself out of the pool. She glanced back at the black depths one last time before sprinting up the stairs, through the library, and back to her dorm. She spent the rest of the night barricaded in her room, trembling in the dark. As dawn broke, her fellow students began returning, groggy and confused, with no memory of the night's events. Nobody believed her story, but Nina didn't care. She knew what she'd witnessed, what she'd narrowly escaped from. She withdrew from the university and moved back home, forever haunted by the memory of that night. The underground pool, the sleepwalking students, the monstrous entity, all became the stuff of nightmares. but they were also a reminder of the terrifying depths beneath reality and the darkness that can lurk within places of knowledge and enlightenment. Nina knew she would never forget, for she had seen the other side and lived to tell the tale. The devil himself. Leo peered from behind his apartment curtains, eyes locked onto the ramshackle building across the street. Its masonry, gnarled and eroded by time, was as weathered as its sole inhabitant, a grizzled old man named Herman. Leo's fascination had evolved into an unhealthy obsession, fueled by the belief that this frail elderly man was more than he seemed. He was convinced Herman was the devil incarnate. Leo had never been a believer in the supernatural, but Herman was different. His eyes, an eerily fiery red, held an unnatural glow even in the dimmest light. The hollowness of his laughter echoed around the empty street, filling Leo's mind with sinister images. Once, Leo had caught Herman speaking to himself in a tongue that made his blood run cold. He began researching and found references to ancient languages, long forgotten, except, it seemed, by the devil. Determined to save his city from the clutches of this demonic entity, Leo started planning. He mapped Herman's routine, calculated his vulnerabilities. He collected religious relics, a crucifix, holy water, a silver dagger blessed by a priest, hoping they would provide some defense against the devil. He even acquired an old Bible, inscribed with verses of exorcism, from a distant monastery. One night, the young man felt ready. He left his apartment, his heart pounding like a drum, the cool silver of the dagger pressing against his palm. He crossed the street under the cover of darkness and knocked lightly on Herman's door. To his surprise, the door creaked open on its own, revealing the dimly lit hallway. Herman's voice echoed from the depths of the old building, "Come in, my boy." Leo stepped inside, clutching the Bible tightly, the wooden crucifix dangling around his neck. He found Herman seated by a flickering fireplace, his back turned to Leo, but he seemed aware of his presence. Herman's voice, raspy and low, filled the silent room. "You're here to kill me, aren't you?" Leo froze. He swallowed hard and stammered, "You're not a man. You're the devil." Herman turned slowly, a strange smile playing on his lips. He extended his hand, showing a similar crucifix dangling from his wrist. "If I were the devil, would I bear the symbol of the Lord?" Leo faltered. He noticed something else. Herman's eyes were not fiery red but a deep blue. The echoes of his laughter were not sinister but full of loneliness. The strange tongue he spoke was not a devilish dialect but an ancient one, Herman's connection to his homeland. But the strange language, the laughter. Leo trailed off, perplexed. Herman sighed, "I'm from a place long forgotten, my language lost to time. As for the laughter, it's been my only company." Leo, stunned, dropped his dagger. The figure he painted as a monster was just a lonely old man craving companionship. But something wasn't right. A chill ran down his spine. He felt a growing darkness around him, a sense of malevolence. Herman, seeing Leo's discomfort, asked, "What's wrong?" "I feel something. Something dark." Herman's face turned grave. He stood up, pulling Leo towards the fireplace. The flames reflected in his eyes, no longer blue but a fiery red. "It's not me you should fear, Leo." "Then who?" Leo asked, terror creeping into his voice. "You," Herman said. His face turned pale, his body began to tremble. "It's been in you all along, the darkness. It's you who has been tormenting me with your stare, your judgment. It's you who brought those unholy items into my home." A mirror beside the fireplace caught Leo's reflection. His eyes were now a fiery red, an evil smile stretching across his face. He felt an unfamiliar laughter rising within him. A terrifying realization dawned: he was the devil he feared. "The doctor will see you now." The smell of sterile antiseptic and a steady hum of machines woke Lorraine from her slumber. 3 months in a coma, and the world was both familiar and alien. She tried to call out, her lips parting, but only silence spilled from her mouth. Panic swept through her, a chilling wave washing away the dull haze of awakening. A nurse, a kindly woman with aged eyes and a comforting smile, noticed her awake and rushed to call a doctor. The doctor, a stern-looking man with a furrowed brow, checked her vitals and jotted down notes on a digital pad. Lorraine's eyes darted around, pleading for answers, but her voice was an elusive ghost. "Today is your lucky day," the doctor said, a strange glint in his eye. No sooner had the words escaped his lips, 4 men entered the room, draped in black robes, faces obscured by shadows. One of the men nodded at the doctor, who left without a word, his expression unreadable. Lorraine was helpless as they transferred her to a wheelchair. She felt their grip, strong and cold, each one a figure out of her deepest nightmares. They wheeled her out of the room, through a maze of endless corridors, and finally into an elevator. Its descent into the hospital's heart was a silent plummet into the abyss. They brought her to a massive room, dimly lit by eerie fluorescent light. The sight of an enormous glass cylinder at the center of the room sent a shudder through her. It was filled with a viscous, luminescent fluid, and inside, a figure, humanoid, floating lifelessly. Before she could process the horrifying sight, the men maneuvered her to a console lined with monitors. One of the robed figures began typing on a keyboard, and a robotic voice echoed in the chamber. "Patient ready for procedure. Commencing phase 1. Her eyes widened in terror as she felt a prick on her neck. A sharp, sudden numbness spread from her neck down, rendering her motionless. She was trapped within her own body, a silent scream reverberating in her mind. A man emerged from the shadows, no longer in a black robe but in a white lab coat. It was the doctor from before, his features hardened, his eyes devoid of any warmth. "I'm sorry for the deception," he said, his voice echoing in the cold, sterile room. "You see, Lorraine, you weren't in a car crash. You were chosen. Your vocal cords, we had to disable them temporarily. It was necessary." His words twisted into a horrifying revelation. She was a subject, chosen for some unthinkable experiment. Tears welled up in her eyes as her life spiraled into an unthinkable nightmare. "Commence phase 2, the robotic voice droned. The figure in the cylinder convulsed, and then, with an uncanny suddenness, it was looking at her. Its eyes, milky white and void, stared into hers. A chill ran down her spine as she realized, with a sinking heart, that it was mirroring her. The doctor turned his attention back to her. "Lorraine, this is your clone," he declared. "A blank slate, to be imprinted with your memories and experiences, your life. Today is indeed your lucky day." Despite her fear, Lorraine found a grim resolve. She had to escape, to warn the world of this terrifying ordeal. The memory transfer commenced, a visor descending over her eyes. The world spun around her, a cyclone of memories and emotions. In the vortex of her past, she saw an opportunity. With every ounce of her will, she thought of a place, a secret sanctuary only she knew of. A small cabin in the woods, hidden by thick foliage and a winding path. As the whirlwind subsided, she was wheeled back into her room. The doctor's face softened as he said, "Rest now, Lorraine. Tomorrow, you'll be a new woman." Days turned into weeks. Lorraine was once again a spectator to her life as the clone took over. Her world was the four walls of her room, the daily visits by the doctor, her meals delivered by the silent robed men. But there was hope. Whenever the doctor asked the clone about her past, she would mention the cabin in the woods. It worked. Her secret sanctuary was now implanted in the clone, her ticket to the outside world. One night, during a power outage, Lorraine took her chance. With her voice partially recovered, she screamed, drawing a solitary robed man to her room. She overpowered him using a makeshift weapon crafted from broken medical equipment. She dragged herself along the dimly lit corridors, using every ounce of her strength. Making it to the surface, she found her clone, momentarily disoriented by the sudden darkness. Using the confusion, she led her clone to escape. Free from the haunting building, the clone guided Lorraine through the city, into the woods, and finally, to the cabin, their refuge. Lorraine, frail and weak, fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The world awoke to her story weeks later, a chilling tale of deception and human experimentation. The hospital was raided, the dark secrets within its bowels unveiled, and the sinister experiments halted. "Today is your lucky day," the words echoed in Lorraine's mind, but she no longer shuddered. She had turned her horrifying ordeal into a beacon of hope. After all, every horror story could be a tale of survival. And Lorraine was nothing if not a survivor. The dollhouse down the lane. In the ancient, cobblestone town of Verdantine, a peculiar woman named Giselle lived in a decrepit mansion that was a cradle of countless myths. Giselle was notorious for her enchanting porcelain dolls, each more lifelike and captivating than the previous one. The dolls were beautiful, delicate, and meticulously crafted. Some had a certain glint in their eyes or a particular tilt of the head that was unnervingly familiar to the townsfolk. Yet, what made them even more unsettling was the rise in the number of girls missing from the town. One by one, vibrant, lively girls vanished, leaving only heartbroken parents and a community cloaked in fear. One night, at the edge of despair, the anguished parents gathered in the town's chapel. An air of sorrow hung heavy as the discussion turned to a disturbing theory. Giselle, the dollmaker. The dolls, with their uncanny resemblance to their missing daughters, became too difficult to ignore. However, the notion was so macabre, so ludicrous, that the police laughed it off. "They're just dolls," they said, dismissing the terrified parents with a wave of their hands. The police's indifference stung, but it didn't deter the parents. If the police wouldn't act, they would. Under the guise of a night shadowed by despair, a small group of parents decided to visit the mansion. As they approached, the house loomed ominously, windows like dead eyes glaring in the moonlight. With bated breath, they pushed open the heavy, creaking door. Inside, it was eerily quiet, the air filled with the musty scent of old wood and stale air. The only sound was the muted ticking of a grandfather clock, counting down the seconds in an otherwise silent room. But the sight that met their eyes was more chilling than anything they could have imagined. Rows upon rows of porcelain dolls, displayed on dark mahogany shelves, stared back at them with glassy eyes. Dolls with golden curls, dolls with dark, flowing locks, each with their own unique beauty, each mirroring the appearance of their lost girls. Overwhelmed with horror, they moved deeper into the house, reaching the old woman's workshop. At the heart of the room, under a lone, flickering light bulb, sat Giselle, her back hunched over a new doll. She did not turn as they entered, her attention entirely on the piece of porcelain in her hand. One of the mothers, Linda, recognized the doll. It was her daughter, Lily, whose golden hair and deep brown eyes were rendered in perfect miniature. Overcome with fury and grief, she grabbed the doll from the old woman's hand. "You monster!" she cried. "Give us back our children!" Giselle turned her old, withered face towards them, her lips stretching into a grotesque smile. "Your children," she cackled. "Why, they're right here. See? Each is beautiful, perfect, preserved forever as they were." The room grew colder as Giselle's words hung in the air. She began to hum an ancient lullaby, a dreadful, ominous tune that filled the room. One by one, the doll's glassy eyes glowed in the dark, an eerily soft luminescence that was both hypnotic and terrifying. The parents watched in abject horror as the dolls moved, their porcelain faces coming alive with the personalities of their lost girls. Giselle's maniacal laughter echoed through the room. "They are mine now, forever young, forever mine," she croaked, her voice more sinister than before. The dolls started to dance around the room, a macabre ballet that chilled them to their bones. Linda clutched Lily's doll, tears streaming down her face. Her despair gave way to determination. Ignoring Giselle's cackling, she began to sing Lily's favorite lullaby, her voice trembling yet resolute. Slowly, the doll in her hand began to twitch, its glassy eyes meeting hers. Linda sang louder, her voice filled with every bit of love and longing she felt for her daughter. The doll twitched again, then shuddered, and finally, it stilled. When she looked up, the room was silent. Giselle lay sprawled on the floor, her eyes wide open but devoid of life. The dolls had stopped dancing. They were just dolls again. But the most startling sight was that of their girls, their real flesh and blood daughters, emerging from behind the now motionless porcelain figures. Lily ran into Linda's arms. The room erupted in cries of relief. The girls and parents reunited amidst the eerie quiet. The dolls, once vibrant with the essence of the girls, were now mere porcelain figures. The curse of Gazelle had been broken, the town of Verdantine was free at last. But the ghost of the tale lived on, echoing in the silent halls of the dollmaker's mansion, a chilling reminder of the woman who trapped souls within porcelain dolls.
Thank you for watching, and remember, the darkness awaits. Until our paths cross again, stay fearful and stay subscribed.